Hey guys, and welcome to our first edit tutorial video. So we've been doing a lot of these edit tutorials over on Instagram stories for quite a while now. But a lot of you have requested that you want to see something that's a little bit more live, so you can see behind the scenes of how all the techniques are applied. So we're now doing a video format where you can follow along with all the kind of techniques and processes I do. And I'm going to try my best to explain myself as I go along with all the little tweaks I do here. So before I start, I need to make a mention that I am using the Adobe Suite softwares. So that's Lightroom and Photoshop for all my editing. There are other editing softwares out there. I just have used Lightroom and Photoshop for the longest time now. I'm used to it. I'm sure there's loads of great ones out there, but today I'll be showing you on Lightroom and Photoshop. So we're going to jump right in and get started. So as you can see here, I've already loaded up some images. We're currently back in the UK and we visited the British Museum recently, which has this amazing kind of like central hall with this incredible rooftop as well. So we're there just with our family on a day trip, and because we had a camera on us, so I decided to take a few photos and thought they came out pretty good. So altogether you can see I've imported 54 images. Now I'm not going to use all 54 images, but I probably will use maybe 5 to 6 images to finish the final image itself. So, and I'll explain myself why that is as we get there. But the first thing we need to do is actually kind of scroll through each individual one and just find one that we like the most. I did do this before the video started rolling, just to save a little bit of time, but I think the one I like the most out of all of them is this one here that I flagged. So I generally flag all my photos as well. So on Lightroom, it's just P and it creates a flag. It just lets me know this is one that I really like, or it's an important image. Just in case I get a little bit busy and I just don't have time to edit, I can in the future just filter by flags and it comes up with that individual image that I flagged earlier on, or any other pictures I decide to flag. But this is going to be our base image that we're going to do our kind of adjustments on first. On Lightroom, I always do just basic adjustments here and there and do the more advanced stuff on Photoshop. So I'm going to jump right in. So the first thing I do is to crop the image. Pretty much all my images are cropped. I never keep them in the standard ratio. And the reason for that is it's because I don't really like it in the standard ratio. I feel like it's always too long. Landscape, I feel like it's more okay, but especially for portrait, in the normal aspect ratio, I believe it's 16 by 9. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's that. I think it's too long. So I always crop by 8 by 10. It's also conveniently the crop ratio that social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook uses. So it's also great for that. And because most of our images are posted on social media nowadays, we generally conform to that format most. So I'll start off by clicking the 8 by 10 over here on aspect ratio and just start adjusting it up and down. What I do is I bounce between the full view image on the center here and on the left the navigator image as well. And I do this because it helps me get a full view of the image. It's difficult sometimes to see the whole image for itself over on the center, so I need to have a look at the whole preview just so I know how it will look to the final viewer. You see here, I quite like it up here. And before I click enter, I'm just going to jump over to 1:1 as well. So that seems kind of weird why I would use an 8 by 10 and jump to 1:1. And the reason for that is because on Instagram, so this is just an Instagram thing, it takes a photo, and if it isn't a 1:1 aspect ratio, so a square, what it does is it crops it into the feed. Which is obviously the way it does things. But the problem is that often when you crop an image by an 8 by 10 or any other aspect ratio that's not square, it ends up looking bad once it does, because you didn't plan for it to be cropped like that. So I always just jump into 1 by 1 after I've done my 8 by 10 crop, just to see what it would look like at the end. I can see here that it's a little too high for me. I feel like Sarah here actually standing at the bottom, it's a little too close to the bottom. So I'm going to pull that down ever so slightly here. And again, I'll use the navigator preview just to have an idea of how it look finally. And once I'm happy with that, I then go back to 8 by 10. And basically this is telling me that in an 8 by 10 crop ratio as it is now, it'll give me the square that I had before. The only problem is that it's now landscape, which is kind of irritating. To fix that, just hold down Option and just grab the corner and just pull it down. And that will give you the aspect ratio you're looking for again. So the 8 by 10 portrait. So click enter and that's it. I can see now that I've cropped it that the left hand side here is a little bit more cropped than the right hand side. Whenever you have symmetry of images, it's quite important to get it as symmetrical as possible. As soon as there's slight adjustments and it's off symmetry, it becomes very obvious. I'm a little bit lucky that the image itself is quite complex, so it's not as obvious as probably it would have been. But it is a little bit of an error on my part because I assumed that I was shooting at just a slight angle and that just kind of throws everything off balance. But I think I get away with it here just about. Yeah, so there you go. So that's the crop. After that, I usually go into the white balance and adjust that. The thing is here is that I think the British Museum actually do a really good job of balancing all the different color lights and sky and everything. So I think I might leave that alone. I like how it looks at the moment. Oh, before I go any further, I haven't set my profile yet. So I pretty much always start on Adobe standards, as that gives me a fairly flat image and the colors are very neutral. And it's available for everyone as well that uses any types of cameras. If you shoot on a Fujifilm like me, you might get these other profiles down here. And if you shoot on any other camera, you'll get different profiles. I do also like to use the Proteus standard. Again, this is only available for Fujifilms, so I won't use it today, just so everyone can get an idea of what I do whenever I'm using an Adobe standard profile. So the first thing I'll work on is this first panel at the top. So whenever I'm editing on Lightroom, I always start from top to bottom. It just makes it easier. What you might notice as we go down is that your panels are in different positions to my own one. That's because I've actually gone in and just changed the order of all of them, just to be like from what I want to do first to what I want to do last. So the first thing is exposure. I want to get the exposure correct. And what you want to do is you want to set the exposure not based off what you see completely anyway, but use the histogram at the top here, as often the brightness of an image is greatly affected by the screen you're looking at. So in this case, my screen actually now is very, very bright, so I might underestimate how much exposure I need to kind of bring into the image to get it where I want it to be. So by using the histogram, I get a really good idea how it is. So right now it's quite an even exposure, but for this particular image, I want it to be bright and airy. So I kind of want the histogram to be skewed over to the right, just ever so slightly. So I'm going to introduce some brightness here. And I think I'm quite happy with that there. And then I generally leave contrast alone because I introduce it in a different way, which I'll show you a little bit later on. Highlights I'm going to leave alone here. I generally leave the highlights and shadows alone as much as possible, just because I feel like once you start tweaking with those, it makes the image slightly unnatural and slightly too HDR. I'm not a big fan of HDR images, but I do understand that there are situations where you want to bring it in. In this case, I think highlights are fine as is. So I'm not going to touch it there. What I am going to do is I'm going to bring up the shadows slightly, because I feel like, especially Sarah at the bottom, she's getting lost in the darkness there in the shadows. So I'm going to bring it up just slightly. I think there's fine. I'm going to leave the whites alone. I like how they're looking. And I'm going to leave the blacks alone as well. I think it's looking nice at the moment. I'm not going to touch any of the presence sliders. So that's texture, clarity, and dehaze. It was indoors. There was no haze to be seen. It's quite a crunchy, contrasty image. So I don't think I need to help it out in any of these sliders. I will increase the vibrance slightly. So I should mention that with all the images that me and Sarah shoot, we shoot on RAW files. We do that because it captures the most amount of information. But by shooting in RAW, it generally makes it so it's flatter and a little bit desaturated. And again, it does that so it has as much information to work with when we bring it into the editing suite. So I should always keep that in mind because sometimes it's too easy to just focus on the image and get adjusted to the colors of the image and the contrast of the image. So by remembering that is a raw file, I just always boost up the vibrance. Even if I think it looks fine as is, I boost up just slightly. And I do the same contrast, and I'll show you that in a sec. So my next panel is in the lens corrections. So with this section here, I have it so far up because I generally just always have it on. I never have these boxes unchecked. Unless it's doing something really funky and it looks weird. But pretty much 99% of the time, these both are on. Next, down to the transform panel. So I often like to straighten out my lines as I feel like it looks a lot more aesthetically pleasing to have straight lines. I'm a big fan of like straight architecture and just straight on shoots and nothing skewed. In this case though, I think I prefer it kind of skewed as I feel like it exaggerates the cool looking roof and just kind of pulls in the viewer a little bit more. So it's not always just kind of a carbon copy, it should be this or should be that. I think each image should look different and have its own style, in my opinion. But I'll show you what it looks like if it's straightened out so you can get an idea. So I always start with auto. I feel like Lightroom does a really good job of just getting things right automatically. As you can see here, the lines are perfectly straight now, at least they are to my eye. But I feel like the image loses its kind of power and it's, you know, it doesn't really draw the viewer in as much. So I'm gonna leave that off and leave it as is. I feel it's much powerful the way it is now. Moving on, we have the tone curve. This section confuses a lot of people, and to be honest, it still kind of confuses me. But the best way to look at it is it's a line, and it affects exposure at different places. So if you think of the bottom section here, that's actually the darkest parts of the image, and the top section on the right is the brightest sections of the image. By tweaking this up and down, we're affecting the brightness of that particular section. So I always put a pinpoint in the middle. The reason being is because these are the midpoints of the image. I'm generally always happy with where the midpoint is once I get to this stage of the tone curve because I've made the adjustments already in the first panel with the exposure. So I generally always have that in the middle and never moving. I then go on to tweak the highlights first. So I raise this as much as I like the look of, so I think it looks quite good here. And then I go on to the shadows. And I'm just gonna bring that just so slightly. And then you can see here, this is a very slight S-curve to it. And that just introduces some contrast to the image. It's a very slight one here. Sometimes it's much more pronounced. If the image is very flat. In this case, it's quite a contrasty image already, so I'm not having to introduce too much of that contrast back in. I would say what's happening now is the shadows look a little bit too dark, as in, especially where you see Sarah here now, I feel like she could do with just a little bit more detail. I think right about there is good. So at this point, I generally just do a before and after just so I can get an idea of how I looked before and where I am now. It's too easy, again, for your eyes to get adjusted to what you're seeing and just feel like that's the norm. So I do it before with the back line. What's it called, B? Backslash, sorry. So you do it before and after by clicking the backslash key. As you can see, it's just changing before and after. at the moment it seems like it's just minor adjustments, and you might feel like, oh, you know, what's the point out of, you know, shooting raw, bringing it to editor and just making it how it might have looked in also. But I feel like these slight adjustments, the way you want it, make a huge difference to the end image. So moving on, we have the split toning section. So I really like using this section. This part of Lightroom used to confuse me a lot because it didn't really, you know, I can never use it in a way that kind of made sense to me. But I think the best way to look at it is, well, this is actually what it is. It's introducing color to the highlights, introducing color to the shadows. So you can create these really cool effects and really cool vibes to the image. Or the way I generally like using it, you can balance out the color balance of an image much more fine-tuned. Because sometimes what we do when we use the global warmth and cool slider, as you can see up here, it might change an image of a section where, you know, cooler where you want it to be cooler, but then it gets too cool in other parts. So this really helps kind of with more micro adjustments than with the color slide. So I'm gonna, if I show you the global change here, so you can see here I can raise it here, and I feel like the bottom half looks quite nice now actually, but I feel like it loses some of its power in the top half. So if I just get rid of that, and if I use the shadows split toning section, if I increase the saturation just slightly first, and I just change this to more of a yellow color here, to show the 100% color of the color I'm choosing, just hold down Option as you slide the hue slider. So I'm looking for something that's a little warm yellow, you see here. So it just introduces some warmth down to the bottom here that otherwise wouldn't have been there, and I think it looks quite good. Actually, now looking at it again, I feel like the temperature could do with a little bit of warming up. Maybe just about that. Actually, do you know what? I'm not going to use the split toning box for this actually. So what you might see in this video is that I'm bouncing back and forth, and that's because I've not edited this photo before. You're literally seeing it as I'm thinking about it. So I'm going to go back, and I'm actually going to adjust the warmth just there. So I'm going to double tap so you can see what it was before, and just Command Z, just see what it was after. I think that's too much. So again, there you go, double tap to see what's before. Command Z after. Yeah, I think that's a much better white balance now that I look at it. Yeah, is that straight? I'm going to use the angle tool now just to check these 2 points are in line with each other. And they are. Okay, great. So back to editing this image. After split toning, which I'm actually going to leave alone this time, I'm going to go down to the HSL color panel. This is one of my favorite sections of the Lightroom platform, as you get to really fine tune the image the way you want it to look and really create your own style to the image. So everything we've really done previous to this was almost more bringing it to a place where the exposures are all correct, everything's looking kind of normal and nice, and now you're going in and kind of playing the color and creating your own style out of the image. So we're going to start with blues first, because I feel like blues are the most dominant color in this image. So I always start with luminance, because I feel like the brightness of a color greatly affects how I want the saturation to look in the end. So I always start with luminance. As you can see here, it's affecting the roof, but it's also affecting the shadows at the bottom there. So I'm going to go about here. Don't want to go too overboard because it can start looking really fake if you do. And I'm going to introduce some more saturation here. And to have a look to see what you've done, before and after, obviously you can use the backslash key again, but what that does, it also turns off all the other edits you've done. I kind of just want to isolate and just see what the color effects it's having at the moment. So I go over to this little tab on the left and just turn it off and on will show you the before and after with the color adjustments here. So I'm liking how they're looking. I think I'm going to go for aqua next, because just from experience of editing photos, I know this is quite a turquoisey blue. So it'll probably have some aquas in there. If at any time you're not sure what color adjusts what, you can just literally just go from maximum to minimum, and you can just see the effects that it's having. So again, as you can see, it is affecting the roof, and it's also affecting the shadows there as well. I'm actually going to drop the luminance of the aqua just to create some more contrast, but I'm still going to saturate those aquas just to bring in more of that blue. So again, before and after, you can see there. Another way of checking what color is affected by what slider is clicking this little circular dot thing and just kind of going over the different colors of your image. And you can see as I'm going over the different colors, it's highlighting different colors in the saturation panel or the HSL color panel here. So that gives you a good indication of what color affects what. Often it actually affects more than one color when you go over it. I personally don't like that. I like to have more kind of smaller, minute controls of each individual color itself. So I personally prefer just sliding left and right, just checking which color affects what. So now that aqua's done, I then jump into the yellows and oranges because that's the other kind of main color in this image. I'm not actually liking how the yellows are looking. It's looking quite kind of tungsten and, you know, just not pretty. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna brighten them. That instantly kind of it almost creates this desaturation effect to it. But I'm also gonna desaturate it just even further, just to bring some of that kind of yucky yellow out. I'm gonna go for orange next, and again I'm gonna brighten it up. It's going to affect the two pillar buildings on the bottom and also just the floor as well, which is reflecting off that orange light. I'm going to bring that up quite high, but I'm also going to reintroduce a little bit of saturation to it just to balance it back out. So I'm liking how this looks at the moment. I might just introduce just a tad bit more aqua, maybe just about there. Just introduce that blue back that we might have lost from increasing exposure. Yeah, I'm liking how that's looking now with the HSL panel. I do sometimes jump in and tweak the actual hue of the colors, namely usually greens and yellows, because again, you can sometimes get that very tungsten look. So you can see inside the kind of central pillar building, you can see it's looking very, I don't know, tungsten yellow. So by switching the yellow slider hue back and forth. Oh, it's not changing. There you go. You can see it's affecting how it looks. It's the final result. So I might go a little bit more orange here, just to, again, balance out the light. So they're a little bit more even. They're all kind of the same color. Again, I'll do it before and after. You can see what it looks like. And yeah, I think that's looking good now. What does blue look? No, that looks bad. So I'm going to leave that as is. Ooh, I might just put the aqua just a little more towards the greens. So it's a little contrast. Yeah, I'm liking how that looks now. Then on to the detail panel. So this is where I do all my sharpening and stuff. But the thing is, I kind of stopped using this panel in Lightroom just because I feel like with the Fujifilm RAW files, it's creating this strange wormy artifact. I think other Fujifilm shooters out there will probably know what I'm talking about. But back when I was shooting on Nikon, I never had this issue and I thought the sharpening tool was perfectly fine. So in this case with Fujifilms, I tend to just leave it as the default. So just 40 on sharpening and then typically 0 on luminance noise reduction. In this case, I did shoot a fairly high ISO of 3200, which is fairly high for an ASPC camera. So I might introduce just a little bit of noise reduction just to help smooth that noise out. I think that looks fine there. So how I check that, you can either zoom in and actually have a look at the image itself, but also up on the detail panel, there's a small square where you can have a very zoomed in look of what it will look like. So you just need to check it through there. Moving on, we have the effects panel, and I like to introduce a little bit of vignette to all my images. In this case though, because I feel like the edge of the photo is where it's actually bright and the center is actually where it's dark. By introducing a dark vignette or just a darker vignette, it makes it all flat and it loses the contrast of the image where it's brighter on the inside and darker in the middle. So I'm actually going to leave that alone this time. I don't tend to add grain to my images. I know it affects a lot of people like. I generally just prefer it cleaner. And the last panel is the calibration panel. I like to leave this last because it's almost like a filter you slap on at the end. You can maybe just adjust it just completely differently where you want to look right at the very end. Often I don't touch this panel at all as it can create some really weird looks, but sometimes it comes off quite cool. So you see that kind of orange and teal look a lot of people go for. A lot of people just go in and do it here. You can see here, it looks kind of weird. It's not really my style of imagery. So that's all the editing on Lightroom done. You might call it a day here and just be happy with the image. I'm going to take it another step further and use Photoshop just to refine the image further than it actually is. As the image I had in my mind was, you know, an empty place with just Sarah standing alone. I feel like that's much more powerful as an image. Having said that, let's continue with this. So the first thing I'm going to do is take that final edited image that we have and just copy all the edited settings. So I'm going to do that by, go to the bottom left corner, just click copy and check all if it's not already all checked and copy. Now just take all the adjustment we've done and now we can paste it onto another image. Because I've taken so many other images pretty much in exactly the same way, the paste is going to be absolutely perfect. If I just quickly show an example, there you go. It looks pretty much the same. The crop has, you know, altered slightly, but that's not too big of a deal. I'm not gonna get too bothered by that. And what I'm gonna look for here is just the people moving around the images. I need to make sure that as they move, they're leaving some empty space behind them. And that will just allow me to kind of put these images on top of each other and just create an empty space where there eventually was as people moved. I know that's confusing, but it'll make sense as I go along with it. So as I paste and do it, I'm just going to click P. So again, flag these up just so I know at the end of it all which ones have the edited effects on them. So I'm going to go through again, just do a few of these. Again, keeping an eye on where I think people are moving in and out of spaces. That one looks good. That one looks good. And again, some of these are gonna go off on a weird crop and skewed or whatever it is, but try not to worry about that too much for now. Oops, I forgot to flag some of these as I went along. So I'll go back and do that. And I think that's going to be okay for us for the time being. Let's add one more. Let's add this one. Okay, so once you've got your selection of images that you've chosen now and applied the settings to, just filter those out using the flag filter or whichever way you want to do it, so that you have these final images left. So again, I'm going to quickly just scan through these just to make sure that they're covering most empty spaces are covered. What I am noticing is that this bottom left corner especially, there's always someone in that corner. So I'm going to go back to my gallery images and just try and find one where there's some empty space there. So that one there gives me just a window of space. So, yeah, so just that one gave me a window of space. So hopefully that's going to work. If it doesn't really matter too much. I'm not looking for an absolutely perfectly empty photo. I just want to get as much empty space as possible to create the vibe I'm looking for. So now I'm going to select all of these. I'm going to right click, edit in, and just open as layers in Photoshop. Depending on how big your files are, this could take, and how powerful your computer is or laptop is, this could take a while. So sit back and just wait. There you go. Okay, that is done. I'm going to close that because it's going to slow down. Okay, so that took a few minutes, but it's successfully loaded all the files in. So the first thing you do when you open Photoshop, what first thing I do is I locate that main image that we edited with at the very beginning. Which one was it? Which one was it? Which one was it? That one. This was our main image. So what I'm gonna pull that right to the bottom, so that's at the base. And I'm gonna switch these all off, apart from the bottom first and the top. There you go. So this, basically it's a repeat process here. So I'm gonna show you one time and then I'm just gonna fast forward it because this can take a long time to do, depending how perfect you want it to be. But I'll show you one example and you just repeat the process over and over again until you have a cleaner image, or completely clean, however you want it to be. So to do this technique, you really need to make sure you're taking the same photo over and over again at different times. The best way to do it is have a tripod up and just have a shutter clicking maybe every like 10 seconds. And that'll give you a perfectly exact same photos to work with, and it makes it just much easier. Unfortunately, I couldn't use a tripod inside the British Museum, so I had to do it handheld, which is going to create some issues with it kind of being warped or off on a tangent or whatever it is. But this shouldn't be too much of a problem as long as I kept it as still as I could possibly. And it does take a few practices and a few tries to get this kind of nailed down. But I've been doing this technique for a few years now. So yeah, it's been working really well for me. The first thing you need to do is just highlight both images that's still turned on. You can see here indicated they're both turned on with the eye. I'm going to highlight them both, making sure I highlight the bottom layer second. I actually don't know if that makes a difference, but I've always done it that way. And then click Auto Align Layers and Auto OK. So what that's going to do is it's going to align the top layer to the bottom layer as much as it possibly can so it fits on top of each other. It's going to create this really funky looking shaped image now, which is fine. It's okay for now. But if I turn that off and on, you can see the bottom layer hasn't been warped at all. So it's keeping the bottom layer as it is and warping the top layer to fit back with it. I think that's really important that you remember to do it that way around. Otherwise you might end up with a final image you're not too happy with. As I turn this off and on, you can see most of the image isn't really moving, but there are micro slight adjustments, especially in the window. You can see here as I turn it on and off, it's just shifting ever so slightly up and down. Now this isn't going to be a massive issue because I'm not comping those windows back in. What I'm comping is the people around the bottom, the stairways, the bottom floor and all of that. So because those look generally exactly the same, it's not going to be an issue. There are ever so slight kind of tweaks here and there. You see that shift. And to fix this, the best way to do it is just click on the top layer, go to your, I don't even know what this is called. Screen? I think it's called screen. The screen section. The screen section, I'm just going to call it that. If it's wrong, I'm going to put it at the bottom somewhere. And I'm going to go to difference. And on difference, you can see it changes to this black and white kind of X-ray looking thing. But this is just basically putting the image on top of each other. And if it's exactly the same, it'll be black. If it's not, you'll see these like kind of X-ray-like outlines. So the idea is to have it as similar as possible. obviously ignore the people because that's what's moving. So the people will never be the same. What I'm looking for now is where these are matching. What you can do, because sometimes what happens is that one part might be the same and another part might be different. You can actually just duplicate the layer and just do it again, but just moving it in different parts. So I'm going to focus on this staircase on the left first. Here, I'm just going to click the move tool first, click the image and just move it left and right, up and down until I feel like I have it so it's as equal as can be. So I feel like that's a good fit. Again, it's often very difficult to get it perfect and you have to do this several times to get it exactly right. But I feel like this is a good start here where it's as dark as possible. You can see here. Once you're done, just make sure you turn the screen back to normal for the top layer. Make sure you highlight it, change the screen back to normal on the top layer. And then we can start blending the two photos together. First thing to do is just to create a mask over the top at the bottom here. So you create a mask and you want to inverse that. So you, again, click the white mask, Command and I, now inverse it. And it will now not show anything, which is what we want it to do. Instead, we're going to grab the paintbrush, B for brush, click the layer, I'm going to zoom in, zoom is using Z, and brush again, so I can decrease the size of the brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start using white on the mask, start painting in where those people are. Sorry, where the people have now moved. You can see here. There you go. Oh, you can see here, this is a good example of you don't, especially when it's really sporadic and there's quite a few people around, you need to use more than one image because sometimes where someone's moved, another one's walked into that person's space, so it's just like a different person in the same space. So in this case, I'm going to leave this guy alone. I'm probably going to have to use another image to overlap to get rid of him. But I could just walk around here and just have a look. You know, again, there's someone else that walked into that one space. Let's check up here. Again, these people aren't going to be blended out in this image. So I successfully blended those two people out. And what I always do when I finish blending is I just collapse the two together so I don't get confused by thousands of layers. It also really slows down my computer because it's not the most powerful. So I always end up collapsing them. But because I know that this image has other sections which I could use, I'm actually going to duplicate it before I collapse it down. So now that it's duplicated, I use Command J to duplicate that. I then highlight the original again, I highlight my base layer, and just Command E and collapse those two down. I have to remember to drag that back to the bottom though. That's really, really important. I'm going to delete this copied layer. I'm going to delete the layer mask from it so that we have that same image that we blended into the other one again. This time, I'm just going to go back to difference again. I'm going to focus on the right staircase, just making sure it's aligned on the right perfectly. Again, I can click the move button or click V, it's a shortcut for that, and just move this staircase, this image around so that it's just as aligned as I think it possibly can. I think there works. Again, turn it back to normal. Create a mask, inverse mask as well. Ooh, inverse the wrong thing. Make sure you highlight the mask when inversing. Oh, what's going on there? There you go. Not sure what happened there. Okay, back to brush. I'm just going to try painting these guys out. There you go. You got to be careful sometimes when doing this because you might accidentally leave behind little ghosting of people where you haven't fully blended them out. So you can see here where I blended that other person out, someone else's foot came in. So I want to zoom in, just take more care in this small section, just making sure that there's no artifact. Now, if you get this situation where only a tiny fraction is being blended in and out, no matter which, no matter which section you're using, I tend to just go for, just leave the foot in for now. And I'm gonna collapse these two down like this. And I actually use J, a spot remover, to get rid of this one spot. There you go. There you go. That's a perfectly removed section. So the reason why I do this technique over just using a spot removal is because it creates the most seamless blend possibly can. Because I'm not trying to get Photoshop to recreate what it thinks it's there. Instead, I'm actually taking what is there and blending it back in. It is a lot more hassle, but the end result is usually much cleaner and much better. So I'm just going to continue doing this with all the different layers, and you'll see the end result at the end. I'm not going to show you because, again, this is probably going to take me an hour or two, so I'm not going to have you waiting this. I'm just going to fast forward it. So that's the end of the image. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I know it was a long and maybe it got a little bit difficult towards the end, but you definitely don't have to do the Photoshop section if you don't want to. Obviously, this is a technique we use a lot if the situation forces us to. So if we can just wait, we will 100% wait because it'll save us hours in editing. Also, if we can use a tripod, we generally will just put on a filter, an ND filter, and just slow the shutter speed down so everyone else is blurred. Again, we couldn't do that because we're in the British Museum. So that left us with our last resort, which is to use this blending technique. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if there's any questions or if anything, didn't quite make sense, do drop us a comment below and let us know. We're hoping to do more of these, maybe not so advanced next time. We'll start with maybe some other simpler ones, but we hope you guys enjoy it. Do let us know if you want to see more, and if there's anything else you want to see, just let us know. Bye-bye.